The survival horror genre of video games has no shortage of amazing titles that have defined their generations. The two franchises that many would argue have done that more than any other are Resident Evil and Silent Hill. The former set the foundation for how a survival horror game should play. Limited inventory space and ammunition that made each shot fired a commitment, slow and deliberate movement which forced the player to constantly be aware of their surroundings, and enemy encounters that incentivized avoiding combat altogether to conserve resources. The latter set the foundation for how a survival horror game should feel. Its writing, music, voice acting, environment design, and cinematography created every horror fan's favorite word: atmosphere. The first four Silent Hill games all create their own distinct interpretation of this atmosphere, even through something as seemingly simple as having a single color being emphasized in each game. Anytime I hear people talk about growing up with these two series as they were coming out, it's clear that the experience was important to them and played a part in why they fell in love with gaming. I am not one of those people. You see, I was born right about here, and Resident Evil 1 and Silent Hill 1 came out right here and here. I was freaking out at the bats from the beginning of Batman Returns the same year Silent Hill came out, so there's absolutely no way I'd be able to make it through a game where this happens. My first time playing a horror game was in 2005, playing Resident Evil 4, which ended right about here until the Wii version came out and I was a slightly braver man. And after that, survival horror games kind of stopped being survival horror games for a while. A heavier focus on action and reflexive combat started to take hold. The carefully crafted atmospheres began to fade away in favor of bombastic set pieces. Because of this, I decided to play some of the older games that I was too young to play when they first released. The two standouts were arguably the most influential titles from both Silent Hill and Resident Evil, being Silent Hill 2 and the Resident Evil 1 remake. I gained an appreciation for what I realized was lacking from everything I had played up to that point. There was still the occasional game that would release that had a faint spark of that essence that defined the greats of the survival horror genre, and even Resident Evil finally started to embrace its roots, starting with the release of Resident Evil 7. But there was nothing that came out that felt like it truly understood what a survival horror game should and could be. That is, until the end of 2022. Signalis is my favorite survival horror game. It has evoked just about every emotion imaginable in me. I think about its characters and story constantly, and I listen to its soundtrack when I need help focusing or getting my mind off of things. It has irreversibly changed my life. Signalis is also a very difficult game to make a video on because it is so dense with points to talk about and analyze, a lot of which have already been done by people much cooler and smarter than me. So instead of trying to do a deep analysis of the lore or trying to objectively determine exactly what is going on in the narrative, I'm going to do something simpler. I'm just going to share my thoughts on the game and try to explain why I think it made me feel the way it did. And honestly, even that might prove to be impossibly difficult if the extremely delayed release of this video isn't any indication. It's the type of game that slowly creeps its way under your skin without you even realizing it until it's far, far too late to ever go back to the way you were before. Let me tell you about my Signalis experience. So, with the absurd lack of detail I gave just now, if you haven't played Signalis for yourself, you're probably wondering what it's about. This section will be my pitch to you to go play it for yourself. Signalis is a survival horror game that takes place in a dystopian future where a tyrannical imperialist nation governs its people with unimaginable cruelty. This is a world where people's entire personalities are recorded as data and printed onto mass-produced biosynthetic replicas to serve as glorified slaves in service of the nation's prosperity. You play as one of these replicas, LSTR Unit 512, or Elster for short. The game opens with you waking up on the pioneering ship Elster is responsible for piloting and maintaining, the Penrose 512. It's crash landed on a snowy planet that's home to a mining facility. The other person on the ship, the fully human Gestalt officer in charge of Elster named Alina Seo, is missing. It's here that the journey begins, and Elster makes her way into the facility in search of Alina. The gameplay itself is very much inspired by the Resident Evil remake. It's even got an option for traditional tank controls if you really want to lean into it. Most of the game is seen from this same top-down-ish perspective, so it makes placing your shots all the more stressful with how limited your vision can be at times. The enemies themselves don't make things any easier either. They're these shambling, decayed husks of replicas that make me uncomfortable just watching them move sometimes. A lot of the time, they'll come in big groups too. It's very rare that you're lucky enough to find a room with just one enemy to deal with. And if you decide to play on the more difficult survival difficulty, oh boy, you better be prepared to learn how to bait out enemy attacks and make a break for safety, since a single hit from the most basic enemy is enough to do serious damage to Elster, and enemies take more of your precious limited ammunition to go down. It's not all combat though. There are plenty of puzzles to be found in Signalis as well. For a lot of these segments, you'll go into a first-person point of view and directly interact with the different pieces and mechanisms in front of you. There are some really good ones here. You have your usual write down a piece of information to be used later types of puzzles, but there are quite a few that had me pleasantly surprised with how fun and engaging they were. Hell yeah, circuit breaker math. Honestly, some of the most fun I had in the game was trying to piece together some of its tougher puzzles. It's got a very distinct presentation as well. The combination of classic low-poly models and pixel art with modern lighting and shading is perfect for a survival horror game. I was hooked by the time I got to this start menu just past the title screen. The voice you're hearing now is the only audible dialogue in the entire game. It's also got one of my favorite soundtracks in a horror game. Every piece of music you hear will set the tone for everything else happening on screen. One thing that really stood out to me was its use of older music from all sorts of different points in time. The last thing I think I'm comfortable saying about the game for those who haven't played it yet would be that it'll probably make you uncomfortable. Not just through the violence on display or grotesque imagery, but with the thoughts and feelings it's trying to convey. This isn't the type of story that'll end with you feeling happy. Even so, I absolutely think this game is a must-play for anyone who has an interest in the survival horror genre. All of the awards and accolades it's received since its release are for good reason. Signalis is absolutely best experience going into it, knowing as little as possible. From this point of the video forward, I'm going to be discussing aspects that cover the entire game from beginning to end. So consider this your spoiler warning. Building tension and anxiety through gameplay is the most important foundation for any horror game, not just survival horror. One of the most common ways this is done is through disempowering the player. Where the challenge of some games might be defeating powerful enemies or clearing intense platforming challenges, the challenge of horror games is to simply survive. You start out with little to no means of fighting back against enemies that outnumber and outpower you. You're not playing as a superhuman who fights monsters as part of their day-to-day life. You're playing as an average person. In the early days of survival horror, this was reflected in how clunky these games were controlled. It took time to set up a shot with a firearm, and it could feel like a chore maneuvering your character to avoid the much quicker enemies. Within that perceived clunkiness, though, you begin to feel like you're embodying these characters. Every small struggle you overcome becomes a massive triumph. However, one potential problem that many of these games run into, particularly in the Resident Evil series, is the need to give the players a feeling of growth. You'll usually start with just a handgun and a knife, but by the end of it, you'll be packing like a shotgun, a rifle, a grenade launcher, more than enough ammo for all of your weapons, and a surplus of healing items. this isn't even necessarily a bad thing, since you're also given stronger enemies to use the stronger weapons on. I just feel that with this type of implementation in a horror game, it takes a lot of the horror out of it. Signalis doesn't fall into this trap. At its core, the gameplay of Signalis most heavily takes inspiration from the Resident Evil remake. Point-and-shoot aiming, secondary equipment, gradual introduction of new enemies, it's all there. The most important similarity, though, is in how it handles its arsenal of weapons. Pretty much every weapon you get after the first pistol has more firepower than it, as you might expect. However, it's also by far the most common ammunition type you'll find while exploring. Enemies don't drop any items, so your supplies are limited to what you can scavenge. The revolver you find later might essentially be a stronger version of the pistol, but you'll also have less bullets for it. With this in mind, it can be a pretty safe bet to bring your pistol with you when exploring new areas for the first time and you're not sure what to expect. The other weapons all have their own strengths. The shotgun can deal with multiple targets at once, the rifle can deal massive damage with the right shot lined up, the flare gun can instantly burn an enemy's corpse, which can be very valuable, as we'll talk about in a moment. I used every weapon during my first playthrough of this game up to the very end, because they all were useful in their own situations. Not only that, but you don't have a melee weapon with infinite uses like a knife that you're able to fall back on. If you want to deal damage, you have to use some kind of resource. It challenges you with something more than just stronger enemies. It forces you to get creative with how you choose to approach these situations. One of the best examples is the encounters with the Colibri-type replicas. Colibri models are small and frail, with no aptitude for physical combat at all. Instead, they're equipped with a module that allows them to tap into a psychic ability known as bioresonance. You can't directly fight her like this, so instead of shooting her, you have to go to your radio module and input the frequency that pops up on screen. Do this enough times and she'll go down. This probably sounds like an easy enemy. She doesn't require any ammunition to defeat, and inputting a radio frequency is simple enough. Simple enough, that is, until other enemies start to show up along with her, and you have no way of fending them off. This same encounter becomes a desperate struggle to survive attacks both psychic and physical, represented through the sheer chaos happening on screen. You can't blast your way out of this situation with a big gun. You need to break it down piece by piece until you're able to overcome it. Overcoming them doesn't even have to mean killing the enemies. It can mean creating a situation where you have just enough time and space to escape. Your goal is to survive. There are two very specific things that work in tandem with one another that make that goal nightmarishly difficult. The first is how your inventory is handled. You're limited to just 6 slots, and that accounts for everything that you're carrying. Keys, ammunition, tools, and weapons all have to be managed with that small capacity. Post-script edit, a new update has just come out while I was working on this video that allows for an optional expanded inventory and for certain key items to not take up space. I think making it a toggle as opposed to totally changing the original game outright is neat. The next is the resurrection mechanic utilized by most basic enemies. Just like the infamous Crimson Heads in Resident Evil Remake, enemies can come back to life anytime you re-enter a room after killing them. The only way to prevent this is if you burn their corpse, also just like in Resident Evil Remake. And there's no way for you to burn all of them. This means that you're never truly safe from encountering an enemy, no matter how many times you kick them while they're down. On their own, these mechanics can and will frustrate the player. It takes both of them combined to create a tension and anxiety that I haven't felt from any other game I've played. Let me give you one of my favorite examples. The first floor of the Sierpinski facility you get to explore doubles as a tutorial of sorts. You pick up your first weapon, you fight a few enemies, solve a couple puzzles, and then make your way to an elevator after finding an ID card to use it. If you're quick enough, you can probably beat this section in about 20 to 30 minutes even on your first time through. Once you get on the elevator, no matter what floor you select, it only goes down to the 3rd floor before stopping. This floor is much bigger than the last one. That means more enemies, more items to collect, and more places to explore. Your main objective for this area is to collect 5 key cards needed to open this door. You can find them in any order, you just need to bring them to this room and put them in the appropriate spot on the door. This sounds pretty easy, right? Well, let me list off all of the key items you'll need to proceed past this area. Pump room key, socket wrench handle, 10mm socket, water key, fire key, air key, gold key, blank key, examination room key, video cassette, and the incinerator room key. There's also the eidetic module and shotgun that you can find in this area, which aren't technically necessary, but they're still so useful that you should really pick them up anyway. Even if you don't count them from the total, that's still 11 items that you'll need to bring to the right place at the right time just to make progress. The first time I got here, I was panicking from trying to figure out how to prioritize my inventory space. Do I leave my spare shells in storage so I have an extra slot for a key I might come across? But what if I get blindsided by a large group and I'll need the extra ammo? Do I bring these keys with me and drop them off in the door now? Or will that enemy I killed the first time come back and get a hit on me, meaning I should have some healing items on hand? To many people, they see this as just bad game design. But for me at least, there's one thing that saves this from being a disaster and turns it into one of the most enjoyable challenges I've had in gaming. Elster controls like a goddamn dream. I personally don't use the previously mentioned tank controls, and the full analog option makes Elster move and respond with a snappiness that feels just right. Every room becomes a living, breathing puzzle that you have to actively respond and adapt to while navigating it. The tension that comes with finding the slimmest gap in between enemies turns into sweet relief as you make it to the exit, only for that tension to come thundering back in as you're greeted with even more enemies in the next room. And the best part to all of this is just how in control of the situation you feel. Every little choice you make, what weapons you take, which items you bring, which items you pick up, what path you take, what enemies you fight, how you fight them, it all comes together to create something more meaningful than the individual choices themselves. A feeling. The area in the game where I think this feeling is strongest is called Nowhere. No, not that Nowhere. After fighting your way through the protector's quarters of the Sierpinski facility, your next stop has you take an elevator deep, deep down into the mining tunnels. If you're like me, you'll immediately realize that something is off. No map data. Every other area has a pretty comprehensive map that fills itself out as you explore, letting you know what doors are inaccessible, open, or locked. But in Nowhere, you get nothing. Your options are either to try to commit this entire sprawling area filled with all sorts of rooms, flesh hallways, and wire traps to memory, or just get old-fashioned and create your own map. All the while, there are more puzzles, more key items to find, which means more difficult inventory choices, and more enemies to either fight or avoid. It's a great way to get players to really hone in and focus on the layout and details of everywhere they go while they're here. This is really important, because the game then decides to do this. Exiting a room and then entering the next one from the same direction is an unbelievably small detail, I know. But this is the first and only level in the game where it does something like this. It takes whatever comfort you may have had left in knowing where you're going and what you're doing, and shatters it. Removing your ability to access the map only strengthens the tension here. You want to make sense of this nightmarish place, but you can't. Your goal isn't to make sense of things, though. Your goal is to survive. The first time I played the game and experienced this moment, that feeling from before began to creep its way through me. It was only then that I understood what that feeling was. It was fear. There's that word again. I guess I should try to explain what my own personal definition of atmosphere is. To me, the atmosphere of a game is almost synonymous and interlinked with its style. It's the energy that resonates from that style and makes the best of the best games what they are. You can't pin down one factor that makes an atmosphere what it is, because it's the culmination of many factors working together in an attempt to capture a player's attention and invest them in the world that they're participating in. Let's take a closer look at the poster child of video game atmosphere to get a better idea of what I mean. Silent Hill 2 has very plain gameplay. The combat is awkward and kinda boring. There's extremely little enemy variety. Trying to move the protagonist James around the simplest hallways feels abysmal, which is surprisingly immersive now that I'm also a 29-year-old out-of-shape guy. All of this goes against pretty much everything we just talked about that I like in Signalis. So why do I still enjoy this game so much then? Because of everything else surrounding it. The sense of foreboding that comes from exploring the streets of a foggy town with nothing but a basic map and a few notes on it to guide you. The eerie nature of the cutscenes that use excellent cinematography to draw you in. The many intertwining narratives that get slowly revealed through your journey and the documents that you find. The phenomenal soundtrack that'll send jolts of anxiety through your body one moment, and then trance-like relaxation the next. All of these things are Silent Hill 2's atmosphere, and it's beloved as much as it is because of how they all work together. So then, what defines Signalis' atmosphere? Let's start with the awesome visual design. It feels like every single thing that you're able to see on screen at any point in time, whether in gameplay or cutscene, is there with a purpose. A narrow hallway you can barely see down that's got enemies just waiting to attack you. A shot of Elster standing next to another replica over a gaping elevator shaft. A cityscape rushing by just outside a train window. The game is made up entirely of moments like this. Some flash by the screen almost instantly, but even that serves a purpose. The cinematography is so unbelievably good. The part in the game that scared me the most just through its visuals only lasts a few seconds. The visual design also plays a huge role in the world building of the game. You'll come across propaganda posters that depict the different replica models as these pristine, heroic figures with very eye-catching colors and layouts, but then find very bland, no-nonsense profile documents on the same model that detail the physical and psychological issues it has as a result of its original gestalt. Every document you find has a unique look, and every item you come across can be fully examined in 3D. This isn't anything new to the genre, but it does play an important role in immersing the player. They slowly start to get a picture of what life under the Yusan Nation is like, represented by the ever-watching Red Eye. Eventually, it's not just the relentless husks that scare you. One last, very specific detail of the visual design that I really want to bring attention to is the UI. In older survival horror games, things like the inventory and map screens were focused on matching the tone of the rest of the game. In Signalis, these things are used to make us really feel like we're in Elster's shoes. Her lack of shoes, I guess. But anyway, look at the way this inventory screen looks. It's styled like an old computer interface, because Elster herself is essentially part computer through being a replica. The part of the menu that lets you reread old documents is now a physical piece of data stored as a memory within Elster herself that she can access at any time. This is also where you can find the radio module I mentioned earlier, which you'll use for a lot more than just fighting Colibris. Even small details like the icons that pop up when you're near something you can interact with, like a door or item, become contextualized as something almost diegetic to the game's world. My favorite usage of this idea is how taking damage will distort the entire screen. At first, it's only during the brief moment of impact you actually get hit. But as you take more damage, it'll become constant. All the sound begins to fade away as you get closer and closer to death. Elster is the window through which we're able to see the game's world, so the more damage she takes, the foggier that window becomes. You're even able to cheat death through sheer luck, which will be signified by this shape flashing on screen after taking damage that would otherwise kill you. When death does manage to take you though, you're greeted with a blue screen indicating a fatal systems crash. Push a button here and it abruptly transitions back to the start screen. Sound design is just as important in establishing atmosphere, and in Signalis' case, it's just as strong as its visual design. The sound effects are all very satisfying. Enemy shrieks are appropriately startling, and using a weapon always has just the right amount of punch. The effects that make the strongest contribution to the game's atmosphere are the ambient tones that you can hear in the fleeting moments of peace. A PC monitor will hum softly. A fan will whir quietly, yet steadily. But to me, the most important part of the sound design is the music. To put it bluntly, this game's soundtrack is all over the place. One moment, the enemy encounter music will have my hands trembling and my breath unsteady. And the next, I'll be listening to soothing harmonies while catching my breath in a planetarium. It takes clear inspirations from older survival horror titles, and yet the work Cicada Sirens and 1000 Eyes have done on this soundtrack is distinctly their own. It has this weird effect where you'll almost swear you recognize a tune from another game like Resident Evil because the instrumentation or something like that sounds familiar. Like, this save room theme just sounds like it came from an old, obscure PS1 game. Then you'll hear something you actually do recognize, like any of the several classical pieces that are directly used or referenced within the soundtrack. All of this creates this incredibly odd sensation of nostalgia for something that you're experiencing for the first time if you're even just the slightest bit interested in survival horror games. My favorite piece in the entire soundtrack, Die Toteninsel, sorry if I got that wrong to any German viewers, uses part of the melody from Rachmaninoff's Isle of the Dead. You can actually hear it all over the place in the soundtrack, but this one is my favorite. Its tone is quite soft, with the loudest instrument being a lone piano. It carries the melody forward at a constant pace. Not fast, but not slow either. It feels like it's trying to move forward to some sort of resolution, but every time it gets close, the flow of the music keeps pushing it ahead. It's also used as the BGM of choice for some of the game's most important cutscenes. The original Isle of the Dead symphonic poem was inspired by a painting by Arnold Böcklin of the same name, one that wasn't even the actual painting but a black and white reproduction of it. Both the painting and the piece of music are featured heavily in Signalis. The painting is well known to have several different iterations between 1880 and Böcklin's death in 1901. However, perhaps not as famously, the symphonic poem also had multiple versions from the first printing of its score in 1909 all the way through 1929 for its initial recording. For one reason or another, Rachmaninoff and Böcklin found themselves revisiting and recreating a single work of theirs for decades. I asked earlier what defines Signalis' atmosphere, and I think it's here, where both the visual and sound design converge, that we can start to find our answer. The low poly graphics combined with its control scheme make it feel like a game that realistically could have come out like 25 years ago. Beyond just the references to its inspirations, though, It is fixated on the past. It's fixated on how we as people process and understand the past by reliving and revisiting it over and over and over again. But why? Some of my most memorable experiences in Signalis came from simply reading the documents that you'll find throughout your journey. Sometimes it was from reading a character's journal for the first time and learning about their thoughts and aspirations, or coming across a note left behind for another character's sister, which leaves you wondering if they'll ever find each other. Sometimes it's noticing the foreshadowing in some of the game's earliest files on a second playthrough, and feeling more and more uneasy about what you think you know. The most important element these simple bits of text offer, though, is characterization. We're often given the chance to see the perspectives of other people and how they're responding to everything around them. Whether it's the iron grip of Yusan, the horde of diseased replicas, or just the pangs of sadness that come with missing someone you care about. Listening to the struggles these characters go through with their own thoughts and words makes them feel human. One of the best examples of this is Adler. Just going off the way Adler is introduced, you might not think there's a lot to him. He's an aloof antagonist who seems hell-bent on getting rid of anyone he doesn't think belongs in the Sierpinski facility. He'll make some comments about how he's done this countless times, but it's easy to assume that he's just talking about eliminating intruders in general. Adler is the administrator replica in charge of overseeing the facility, so in reality, this razor-sharp focus on killing outsiders like Elster is just him doing his assigned function. But then you find his replica model information in a document and find out that Adler units are known to be codependent on their commander unit and prone to psychological issues. And then you find his diary, where he recalls hazy details from a dream about his past life, his original self's life. There's also a moment while he's working where he's struck with a vivid memory of a replica he's never met. He talks about the disease stemming from the facility's commander Falk, and how everyone in the facility, both replicas and gestalts, are dying from it. At this point, you might think that he's trying to quarantine the disease, until you find Adler's next diary, where in the first entry, he talks about a meeting with Falk and the day's work being monotonous. It's like everything that happened in the first diary didn't really happen. Things get even weirder when the next day's entry has the same date as the first, and Adler has another meeting with Falk. He mentions an odd feeling of familiarity. The next day, also the same date. The déjà vu begins to become impossible for him to ignore. Slowly, day by day, he becomes more and more aware of the truth. He and everyone around him are trapped in a never-ending cycle of madness, suffering, and decay. There's no way to tell how long this cycle has been going on either. Weeks, months, years, centuries? Slowly, his psyche is broken down bit by bit, and his memories become distorted until there's nothing left. Nothing but his love for his commander. Within a few dozen lines of text, Adler's elevated from a simple antagonist into a tragic character whose adoration and loyalty for his comrades becomes his defining trait and his greatest downfall. One other character whose diaries we find is Alina Seo, the person Elster is going through all of this to find. We find these scattered throughout the Sierpinski facility as we work our way down to the bottom of the mine. In these diaries, we see her perspective of the disease spreading. She expresses worry for Elster that grows as things continue to spiral out of control. There's something strange going on in the mine, and she knows it. Eventually, people begin to just disappear without a trace, and the monstrous replica husks begin to roam the hallways. Her very final entry is chilling. Her hair slowly turns stark white. Memories of another person begin to worm their way into her head. It becomes more and more difficult for her to distinguish her own identity from this other woman's. She remembers a different name and a different life. She's no longer Alina Seo. Now she is. Ariane Young was different from the moment she was born. She lived with her mother Iris, a military radio officer, in a station located far, far away from the rest of civilization. The two were very close. Without anyone her age around to befriend, Ariane developed a couple different hobbies to pass the time. She would decode radio frequency puzzles her mother made, she tried her hand at growing plants, and she took up painting. She grew a particular fondness for lilies, and painting ended up becoming a passion of hers. Her aunt didn't approve of her being brought up like this, though. She forced Ariane to move in with her at the heart of the capital city in order to get a proper education. Her interest in art made her a target for bullying. The Yusan nation had no reason to encourage creativity. It only cared about making useful, productive workers and soldiers. Erika Ito was the only person to intervene when Ariane was being bullied, which led to her and her sister Isa becoming Ariane's first real friends. She would work part-time at her family's bookstore and eventually read the banned Imperial series books. These books detailed the history of the Yusan Empire, the Yusan nation's enemy that they originally broke off from. Unbeknownst to her, it's revealed in her physical exam that she has a strong potential for bioresonant powers. The government worries about what'll happen if she becomes aware of them, so they abstain from telling her this. It's also during this time that she encounters a poster for the Penrose Space Exploration Program. She makes it her goal to become a member of this program in order to get as far away as possible from all of the people and things that want to suppress her from just being herself. After 2 years of compulsory military service as a radio officer, just like her mother, and an entire adolescence of being bullied and put down, she gets her wish. She joins the program, and the ship that she's assigned to is Penrose 512, the very same ship that Elster is assigned to. Alina Seo was never on board the Penrose. It was Ariane. This reveal is monumental because it immediately throws everything we know about Elster into question. Her memory and identity become unreliable. We now have to ask the question, who is Elster? The answer to this question can only be found at the center of this abyss. After gathering 6 plates scattered all throughout nowhere, we step through the gate and are now in a pit that looks eerily similar to the one we originally entered the Sierpinski facility through. Climbing out of the pit, we confront Adler once again. He does not stop us. We march through a desert filled with the corpses of other Elster units. Still, they do not stop us. Images spanning multiple lifetimes, multiple people, multiple existences surge past one another. They push us forward. A voice tells us to remember a promise, to wake up. Finally, we arrive back to where everything began, the Penrose. We try desperately to open the door, but it refuses to budge. We have to get in here. We have to help her. But it isn't enough. We pull hard enough to rip our own arm from its socket, and it still is not enough. Our body collapses as the light in our eyes begins to fade, until everything becomes as as nothing. LSTR-512 was the ship technician replica assigned to the Penrose 512 spacecraft. Her duties included routine maintenance and checks throughout the ship to ensure it could eventually reach a habitable planet. During this time, her Gestalt officer, Ariane Young, would slowly observe and write down Elster's mannerisms. The officer had been given explicit instructions to not have any sort of social interaction with the replica, but she couldn't help her fascination. A relationship would soon bloom between the two, with Ariane introducing Elster to all sorts of music and movies, and Elster wholeheartedly supporting Ariane's interests like painting and gardening. The love shared between the two was undeniable. It was the pure, fulfilling type of love that many people can go their whole lives without finding. Far away from the expectations of society, far away from the red eye of Yusan, they were able to find freedom and solace in each other. Each new day would bring new memories to cherish along with it, and it would be this way for a long, long time. Until one day, a message from the nation arrived. It said that if they hadn't found any habitable planets yet, then they shouldn't expect to at all. In the most blunt, cold way possible, the nation advises the crew to kill themselves to avoid the inevitable radiation poison that's coming, or to have the replica put them into a permanent cryogenic sleep while it's still able to function. Elster and Ariane are going to die, and there is absolutely nothing they can do about it. Ariane was the first to receive this message, and she made the decision to hide it from Elster. She wanted to be able to share whatever days of happiness she had left together with the person she loved. What came next was not quick. As the radiation began to leak through the ship, Ariane's health began to deteriorate. Her hair began to fall out. Her teeth began to rot. It became more and more difficult just to sleep. But the worst part was the constant, agonizing pain. We see this progressively worsen through the notes that we can find that she's left near the end of the game. By the last one, she's pleading for death. It's gotten so bad. Elster, in one last desperate attempt to save her partner, made the decision to put Ariane in cryogenic sleep. The lovers make a promise with one another before Ariane goes under. Shortly after this, Elster would succumb to the radiation and die. Even worse, by this point, the radiation had done too much damage to Ariane. Despite being in this permanent slumber, her body was screaming in pain. This would become the catalyst for her bioresonant powers, the source of the corruption of reality that distorts the bodies and memories of everyone we've met in the game. The first-person segments are all taken from a point in Ariane's life that we get to relive. The entire final level is a recreation of the city block she and her aunt lived in. It's like someone's final thoughts, right before they die, are being projected outward to anything and everything, and anyone and everyone. The end never comes, though. Instead, they're trapped in an endless loop of torturous suffering and flashes of memories that aren't theirs. The only way for it to end is for Ariane to die. That is what Elster, what we came all this way to do. This is how it has to end. This is how everything has to end. I have spent months trying to figure out what I want to say for this next part. I've written paragraphs that don't seem to go anywhere and stopped thoughts from finishing that just didn't feel right. I've decided that at this point, anything is better than nothing. So here goes. I am not doing well. Making this video has forced me to not only confront the darkest points of my life that I thought I had left behind me, but to come to terms with the soul-numbing void of my day-to-day existence now. The hellish struggles the characters of this world endure just for the smallest bit of peace is all too relatable. The scars that they carry that remind them that hope is fleeting, even more so. My family had some old home movies digitized last year. Watching them has been really hard for me, for a few different reasons. I see people spending time with those they have nothing to do with now. I see places that I'll never be at again that were home to so many good memories. Everything and everyone in these videos, in one way or another, is gone. They don't exist anymore. This version of me that seems so genuinely happy and excited to experience every new thing life has to offer died a long time ago. The older I get, the more time puts distance between the me of then and the me of now. The more I start to wonder if this young, innocent person ever truly existed. The memories have become hazier and hazier over time. The best moments in my life are behind me, and the only thing I truly got to keep from them will feel less and less like my own. And it terrifies me more than anything else I've ever experienced in my life. But I'd be lying if I said that's the only thing these videos and these memories make me feel. There's some joy in there too. There's some sadness. There's even some anger and some resentment. There are parts of me that wishes some things could be just as they were back then, and parts of me that would have done things totally differently. It's so many things all at once, and it is so overwhelming to process. It's something I know that I need to do, though. And it's something that I will always need to do for the rest of my life. There will be new memories I make and new people that I meet. This chaotic harmony of emotions is the heart of SIGNALIS' narrative. It's the soul that's found in both the painting and symphonic poem for Isle of the Dead. And honestly, it's the core of why I had to make this video. What was originally supposed to be a Halloween video is only just coming out now because of how hard it's been for me to put these thoughts and feelings into words. My memories are my most valuable treasure and my heaviest burden. Everything we do and everything that we are is defined by our past. We can become trapped in it. When we die and leave everyone we love behind, the only things they have left are their memories of us and the complicated emotions that come with them. Is this okay? Is there value in that? I think so. And to illustrate that, there's one last thing I'd like to talk about: the game's hidden ending. There are 3 different endings that you can get on a first playthrough of SIGNALIS. They're all fairly similar, with some key differences in how Elster or Arion might act or respond. All 3 end with Elster revisiting the room she found the King of Yellow book in before confronting a corrupted Falk. Which one you get is determined by a bunch of different factors that the game is constantly keeping track of. How often you take damage, how much you heal, whether you fight an enemy or run away from it, how much time you spend in certain flashbacks, looking at specific items, and there's a bunch more. Silent Hill 2 does something similar, and I think it's a really great way to make the player's every action feel like it's meaningful, even in the simple moment-to-moment gameplay. The very same day the game was released, a thread on the Steam community forums was made to talk about the different endings. Everyone was trying to figure out what it was they did in their playthrough that got them to their respective ending, and dissecting every minute detail in the plot and world building to make sense of things too. If you're the type that's interested in learning more about the game's lore, this thread is a great read. Out of all the mysteries that everyone was discussing, there was one that nobody could seem to find any clues to. A mysterious safe with 3 locks located in the final room along with the king in Yellow Book. One of the first possibilities they explored was each ending itself being a key. They would hurry to the end of the game after completing a first playthrough to see if one of the locks was missing. They found the safe just the same as it was. They theorized that maybe reaching this room with an older key could do something. This didn't do anything either. Eventually, some of them started to believe that the safe was just a red herring, a puzzle with no real solution that was put there just to confuse the players. Then, on October 29th, someone posted a video in the thread that blew everyone's minds. Someone had found out a way to open the safe, and with it, a hidden 4th ending. The video description had the first solid breadcrumbs that everyone would need to solve this final challenge. There would be 3 different radio signals that would become active on a second playthrough of the game. The next step was to find them. These signals on their own don't really seem like much more than just random noise. People were stumped at first, until someone pointed out that running these new frequencies through an SSTV decoder would reveal images of places you can find in the game. At this point, everything was starting to connect faster and faster. Close examination of the places revealed in the decoded pictures would yield a hidden key. These are in extremely specific spots that require a lot of small movements just to get in the right position. 3 different frequencies, 3 different keys. Everyone was clamoring with anticipation. They had come together and solved what originally seemed impossible, and were about to reach the reward. But before they did, there was one last piece that was needed. After removing all 3 locks on the safe, it still requires a combination to open. There were no more clues in the frequencies to be found. So, where else was there to look? The answer they needed had actually been given to them from the very beginning of the game. The voice telling Elster to wake up from the start of her journey recites a bunch of numbers that seem meaningless at first. It was only after figuring out nearly everything else in the game that the players realized their importance. They are Arion's first and final gift for us. These numbers are the code needed to finally open the safe. And within it, we find a beautiful lily that was nurtured by Arion, a symbol of the love shared between 2 souls interlinked for eternity. For me, this ending isn't just special because it's a well-hidden secret. It's special because of the way it was designed to be discovered. Outside of data mining the game, there would have been almost 0 chance of someone discovering this ending all on their own. It was meant to be found through the efforts of many people of all sorts of different backgrounds coming together. It could only be found through coming to understand Elster and Arion, their past and their present. All of these connections made, resonating in beautiful harmony with one another to solve a problem that could never be solved alone. It's the type of experience that everyone involved would remember, and where each individual would have their own version of the story to share. That is what Signalis embraces more than any other game I've played. Memories aren't really created on your own. They're created together with the many people we share our time with. Whether it's someone we just happen to meet and have a single conversation with, or it's the person we love most and want to spend the rest of our lives with. Memories are meant to be shared, both the good and the bad. They represent our connection with one another. The past can frighten us, but it can do more than that. It can soothe us. It can make us smile. It can make us cry. But most importantly, it can motivate us to keep moving forward. Even if oblivion comes for us, our memories are proof that we'll never truly be alone. I don't think you need to look further than the overwhelming passion that fans of this game have for proof of that. People love Signalis, and they're ecstatic to spread that love in whatever ways they can. They enjoy this game for their own unique reasons, and the community is one that encourages people to share that. The two creators, Yuri and Barbara, regularly share fan creations on their platforms. This is a game that was meant to get you to feel things and want to share those feelings in whatever way you wanted. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I felt upset because I'd missed out on experiencing games like the Resident Evil remake and Silent Hill 2 when they were new because of how great their impact was at the time. Now, though, I don't mind it. I got to be here for something even better. And I wasn't alone for it. We were here to experience Signalis. Hello, and thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of this video. I really want to apologize again for how long it took to finish up, but now that it's over and done with, this is a huge weight off of my shoulders. I'm really, really glad to get this out here. I'm pretty happy with how everything turned out, and I'm looking forward to what is next. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you ended up enjoying the video, maybe consider subscribing. By the time this video goes up, I will be on my way to MomoCon in Georgia for this weekend. I'm going to be meeting up with a few other friends who are here on YouTube and other places in the content world, and we're just hoping to have a good time. If you're going to end up being there yourself, I hope to meet up with you there. But as always, thank you again so much for watching.